The 100% Wild podcast is brought to you by OnX Hunt, the nation's #1 GPS hunting app. Download today in the Google Play and App Store.
What's up, guys, and welcome back to another edition of the Drury Outdoors 100% Wild podcast. I am Tim Chelsvik.
I'm Matt Drury.
And we've got a special guest.
Is he that special? Because he's here and a guest a lot in the off season, so he's just a co-host.
He's just here.
I actually made it in today.
Check it out. Well, and I was out.
It helps our view count.
It really did. Anytime Mark Drury's in the title, for some reason the views and listens tend to go up. It's weird.
So
it feels nice to be back. I was out quite a bit last week,
sicky
with the coronavirus. But I'm good now. So. Or am I?
We'll never know unless you die.
I got bronchitis. Every year, I'm good for one bout, and last week was my bout.
Isn't that the truth?
Luckily, I was stuck in a truck with him for 6 hours when he got it. Me and Scott going to
you guys didn't get it.
Mm-mm. So far unscathed.
Thank goodness.
It's just the cross I bear every year.
Yeah, it sucks.
Yeah.
So I had it for my birthday, had it for Valentine's Day, and
yeah, Tim had scheduled a vacation day for Valentine's Day while he was sick. Still going to dock him for that day, though.
maybe a day and a half, too.
So you were at NWTF over the weekend. How was the national convention down there in Nashville?
Awesome. Anytime you go to the Mid-South, it's a good thing. The hunters are in big numbers. They are passionate. They love to turkey hunt, and most importantly, they love to deer hunt. You know, we're down there for a turkey federation, but all the questions and all the things I talked about were deer hunting. So it's always great down in Nashville. Always. It was amazing electricity and energy in the room.
Yeah, and I saw that our buddy Paul Butsky got inducted into the Hall of Fame down there.
He did. It was an amazing ceremony. It was Paul Butsky, Denny Gulvis, Harold and David, Ronnie Jolly, Denny Gulvis. I mean, it was
Walter Parrott.
Walter
right?
Parrott.
Yeah.
Walter was ill and was unable to attend, but it was a fantastic ceremony.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
And Dick Kirby as well.
Oh,
yeah,
sure.
So, I mean, that's one of those deals where that's those. If you had a pillar of turkey callers, right? Those are
there.
Holy grail, man. I mean, just sitting there seeing all my heroes was amazing, and seeing Chris accept on behalf of his dad, it was very emotional.
Yeah,
very emotional.
Very cool. So, anything else that was news or noteworthy from the NWTF?
No, not in particular. I had a lot of people talking about DeerCast, specifically DeerCast Track, which, is the first consumer show we've worked.
True.
And the feedback was quite good about DeerCast Track. People using it and loving it and how accurate it was. And that was really good feel to hear those things.
That's cool.
Yeah, no doubt. NWTF is mind-boggling just how many people move
packed
through there. I mean, it's that convention center there at the Gaylord is massive, but then just the number of people that come through.
Yeah. It is the perfect venue for that too, because, we do these trade shows, so that's a consumer show, but we've done plenty of consumer shows through the years as well, but having everybody under one roof. And I mean, it's just a different vibe. It's a fun show. Nashville is a fun town in general.
Perfect venue, perfect location. You get to talk to a lot of passionate deer hunters, which is really cool.
It's like the heart of country music, and then you got the heart of the hunting world, right?
Really do. Really do. Because you pull the South, you pull the Midwest, you pull the Mid-South. I mean, see a lot of people from a lot of places.
Yeah.
It's cool.
Very good.
We're kind of taking a walk down memory lane in this episode of the show. One of our listeners wanted to hear some of the good old stories from the good old days from Mark, and some of the, what it was like filming those old VHS and DVD features. So we'll get into that in a minute here. But it's just crazy to think that you live long enough and all of a sudden you have good old days.
Well, we were just saying that off camera here that. Can you believe, 15 years ago is half our company's history ago?
I know. It's amazing. It's kind of scary to hear that and think that.
Yeah. So the company, this is our 31st year. I've been here I think this is my 16th year.
According to LinkedIn, that's true.
Okay. So, but it doesn't feel like that. You know what I mean? When I got here, I felt like the company had been around forever because it was literally my entire life growing up, being around it. You know, I'm sure for you and Terry, it feels like 2 lifetimes or maybe 3 for Terry.
It does, but when you get old enough, you start forgetting. It feels like it's new every day. So there's a silver lining to aging. So
There you go.
Meeting new people all the time.
all the time.
Yeah, for Terry,
Hey,
I
buddy.
was going to say it's every day's new. He can't remember the
So
previous
it's
one.
coming.
Yeah.
How do you handle that, Mark? Because I imagine you have to have a lot of people that have maybe shook your hand at a show or something, and maybe they expect that you remember them. How do you?
I had a gentleman walk up to me and he said, I was there in Natchez, Mississippi in 1989. And I talked to you. You know, this was a calling contest back in the day, which was the calling contest where I met Toxie, right? Well, of course I remember Toxie. I didn't remember this gentleman, but to your point, I get that a lot, you know, because I used to do a lot of seminars. So they feel like, you know, they have this connection to you, but you just can't remember all of them.
Yeah.
I remember many, but you can't remember all of them, you know?
Sure.
Yeah.
So I'd say, hey, buddy, hey, how you doing?
But that is the neat part about it, honestly, getting to meet people. And when I go to these shows, I tend to meet people. I met Mark, I met Terry at this show back in, 20 years ago or 30 years ago. So it's interesting to not relive it for myself, but you get to meet some of the people that these guys had met 15, 20 years ago.
And it was important to them because they remember it and they feel compelled.
And it's always that seminar. It was Mark did a seminar. I met Terry at a gas station
I met 2 people that met Terry at a gas station in Kentucky. And I was like, I don't recall Terry being in Kentucky on the road. And he said he swore he met him in Kentucky at a Wendy's this past fall. And I'm like, Terry wasn't in Kentucky.
No, but the Wendy's might have been right.
I'm like, they had to have been in a different state or something.
Yeah.
He was fairly
Illinois would be more likely.
Correct.
You know, yesterday at the gym, I walked past a guy who was on a cycling machine who could have been Ronnie Dunn from Brooks and Dunn.
Well, did you ask him?
It was just down the street here, and he probably wasn't, but he looked like the spitting image of Ronnie Dunn.
Maybe Terry's got a double somewhere in Kentucky that likes Wendy's,
Yeah. All right. Well, the question of the day today is brought to you by Sportsman's Channel, your home for everything red, wild, and blue, and the new home of Winchester and Drury's Natural Born. I hope you guys are watching that because it's been a heck of a season.
Man, it's
so far.
good. I like
It's
it.
good.
Hi, my name is Jim Green, and I'm from Bath, Pennsylvania. Recently, I've been watching a lot of older videos on the DeerCast app, such as Monster Bucks 1, 2, and 3, and Bow Madness 1 and 2, which are my favorite. Would Mark and Terry be willing to do a podcast and talk about some specific hunts from those early videos and talk about the equipment used back then, the tactics, location, and generally what they were thinking as far as tactics back then, and compare those variables with today's variables? I'm sure there are some cool stories about these old hunts that us listeners never knew about. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jim, for asking the question.
This one's all on you, big boy.
Boy, it's a lot of ground there, but he's right, you know. And as I think back to those early days when we first did deer videos, you're talking about 1990 through about 96 or 7. There is the period that he's referring to, and most importantly about that, if you contrast the way we hunted then with the way we hunt now, it's drastically different.
Yeah.
I mean, we were in the cover, in the bedroom, in a tree.
We catch some heck for that.
Right. And that may be where he's coming at from. He said it diplomatically, but he probably enjoyed those hunts.
Yeah, the timber hunts, the rut hunts.
Everybody loves timber and the rut.
Yeah.
And we still do some of that. But the fact of the matter is we're much more successful on the deer that we're targeting early season, late season, the 2 sides of when he's talking about over a food plot out of a blind, you know.
The footage seems to be a little better too. When
Footage is better.
these older hunts, you see the focus come in and out.
Footage back then. I mean, part of it's equipment, but it just timber hunts are hard to capture very well, anyways, on camera because a lot of times, especially during the rut, they come out of nowhere. Mm-hmm. It's like, oh, they're behind me. Oh, and you're always tied up. When he said that, first thing I thought of was those camera arms that you guys developed back then.
We did. Yeah, we were the first ones to develop a camera arm. They were incredibly heavy.
Yeah.
And we'd have to hoist them up every single day, attach them to the tree. They were loud, noisy. And, I remember days with Stoltz looking at each other and, if looks could kill, because he was always noisy, putting it in the tree and clang, 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 clang. And I'm like, oh my goodness gracious, driving me crazy. And that's back when Terry and I filmed with each other as well. So
speaking of kill each other.
Exactly. Right. But those memories are very fond. And I think the most stark difference is we didn't know then what we know now, and that was the start of our imprint into learning about mature buck activity and habits and tendencies. And a lot of what we learned back then really leads us into today's world and version of Drury Outdoors in the way we hunt and DeerCast, the algorithm. Yeah. Those were the early days of us learning, because we made so many mistakes and we were constantly wondering, why are the deer moving today? And then tomorrow they don't. It's like, shouldn't they all be equal? Shouldn't they, like us, get up and move around every single day? And they just didn't. Yeah. And that's when the start of trying to figure out why they moved really happened for Terry and I, because we couldn't figure it out. And it took us, really decades to figure that out. And that's why we did DeerCast. So.
And you think about doing that with the equipment that you were using at the time, which is obviously bigger and heavier. Battery life wasn't as good. And that's a lot of putting in your time.
It was Panasonic AG450.
AG450 or 455 or 460. SVHS. Through those three productions, we would have had either a 450, 455, 460. It was the start of the Drury Outdoors team. Mm-hmm. Guys like Stan Potts, Steve Stoltz, Jay and Don, Dinker Whiffler, Jeff Probst. Those were the guys that were there in the early days.
That's pretty crazy to think about that too. When you look back over the 31 years of the company's history, you've seen over time a lot of guys that have then gone on to start their own shows and have great careers in the outdoor industry. Speaking of Jay and Don and Stan and all these guys, Stoltz, you go on and on throughout our company's history, and there's a lot of TV shows out there that kind of got their start with us. And it's neat to see. It's kind of like that coaching tree. I always hear the Belichick coaching tree or whatever. It's kind of like that, it's like a root system and just kind of all continues to grow.
It is. And it was one of the most important parts to us. Terry and I came from Southeast Missouri. So our imprint in terms of what we knew about deer season and deer hunting occurred down there on the 40 Acre Club. Well, as we started to go down this path within deer videoing, we meet Jay and Don, and we pick their brain for everything we could. We meet Stan Potts. We pick his brain for everything we could, and vice versa. And we started realizing very early on, the more people we meet, the more we learn about white-tailed deer and how they vary based on terrain, topography. And we learned very quickly those upper Midwest deer were a lot different than the ones that we hunted. And likewise, the deer over in Illinois acted and reacted differently than the ones up in northern Missouri and southern Iowa. And it was the start of a learning curve that got very steep over the next few years. And we learned a lot from Stan and from Jay and Don, things that we still apply to this day.
So when you look back, are there any, if you can remember, specifics, is there any hunt that sticks out from those first couple of videos, the monster buck titles, or a hunt for you personally, or a hunt from Jay or Don or one of these other guys?
I think it was on Monster Bucks 1, but Terry and I were in a tree in Corydon, Iowa, really close to Corydon, on a place we had knocked on a door and gotten permission. And we went in, studied topography, boom, hung a stand up on top of this little knob with this opening in it. And this buck came out, and I killed him. And he ended up grossing, I think, 144, if I'm not mistaken. And I did my reaction, camera went off, and I looked at Terry and I said, "We just shot a booner." And he said, "Yep, we did." Because it was the biggest thing we'd ever seen. It grossed 144, but it had 14 points, if I recall, some forks and stuff. It was a big mature deer, but we were convinced we just shot a deer over 170.
You're big time.
We knew we'd killed a booner. We got to him, saw him on the ground. We were still convinced he was a booner, but it wasn't, until you get to those where you actually shoot one, you don't know what one looks like. Yeah. So I remember that distinctly that we thought we'd shot a booner.
I think that often how much it actually takes to get to a 140-inch deer or 150-inch deer. I think what kind of makes people disillusioned about the television industry or production in general for hunting world is that you see big deer all the time. So it's made people think that they're around every corner, but it's hard to kill them. And it's hard to kill a 140-inch deer. Like every time I walk up on a deer of that size, because I've killed a lot of 130-inch deer and 120-inch deer, it's like, dang, man, this deer is big.
They couldn't make him any bigger than this. It's impossible.
Right. Which is a great place to be. And I think about it, Wade and I, because we both grew up hunting much smaller deer than we see now.
Sure.
Every rack buck is a trophy or a target until we prove otherwise. And your heart skips a beat with every rack you see, whether it's coming onto a field or out in the brush. And Wade and I are both the same. Oh, giant. And then, 2-year-old, 115. So, but I appreciate the fact that I grew up in Bloomsdale, Missouri. And when you saw a 2-year-old, you saw a rack buck and it was a rare occurrence.
And you shot him.
And you shot him. Absolutely. Or shot at him, and Wade's the same way. And Matt, to your point, like that keeps it exciting because every rack buck is a special time and a special moment.
I'm glad because I kind of thought that maybe I was the only one that felt that way. Anytime you see bone out there in the woods coming, you think, oh my gosh, this is it. This is the monster. Awesome. And typically for me, it's not. It's still fun though.
Yeah, even that. I mean, even as you kind of grow as a hunt in your hunting career, as people like to say, a lot of times that first deer might lead to the second deer. You're excited because you're seeing a rack buck. Who knows what's behind him? So even if he's not the largest, you're thinking it's the excitement of what could be behind him, what's coming. That's 100%. Why you can keep going out. You're excited about what might happen next. A lot of times, nothing.
The archery nerd in me, one of the things I really love about those older shows is you hear the shot happen and then you can watch the arrow go out to the deer.
You could practically count the rotation on there.
I mean, speeds were just totally different, but you're still making shots. But the fletchings were typically a lot bigger and those big fat aluminum arrows.
They were feather too, right?
Oh,
Back then it was all feather fletching.
Make sure they hear it coming,
And that's kind of what I grew up with. And so I'm old enough now to where there's a nostalgia factor to that, to see that.
Back then, what kind of bows were you guys shooting? Was it high country or was it kind of whatever?
I'm trying to think back then. I think it would have been an Oregon bow. Would have been either a high country or an Oregon because I was on the road selling mossy oak and I had high country for a while as a line and we all shot high country. And then I had the Oregon bow line for a little while. And I think a lot of those were Oregon bow kills until we eventually ended up with a weight.
Yeah.
Let-offs were totally different. I mean, you were holding probably 70% let off on those.
Yeah. What poundage would you be shooting back then even?
Usually in the low to mid 60s, if I recall. I always shot like 61 to 64 or something like that, because we're holding a lot, to Tim's point.
Yeah.
And, back then, this is the same period we're out in Oklahoma turkey hunting every spring. Well, overdraws were a big deal for the 3D guys because they were trying to get as much speed as they could. We didn't shoot them for deer, but a lot of the guys were the speed demons, Jerry Hale and Jeff Steele and those guys out in Oklahoma. They were shooting overdraws, shooting 90 pounds. Stanley Oaks, the same guys I hunt with to this day. Crazy to see what they went through and how many pounds they pulled. It's why all their shoulders
feel. Yeah.
Well, for those kids that are listening right now, an overdraw is something that literally extends your draw length. It kind of puts the arrow rest a little farther back and just gives you more inches on your draw so you can get more power out of your draw cycle. It
shortens your arrow.
Yeah, it's not a thing anymore, but like my dad's bow, my dad was probably 5'9" or so, and I think he was shooting a 32-inch draw length, which is crazy.
So how far back does it go on your... I mean,
it sits behind your normal riser. It just was an attachment that came backwards.
Gotcha. So you're still resting at the same spot on your face, but it was something in front that was
it kind of brings the riser shelf closer to you.
It comes backwards.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah. But just a totally different world.
So back to the Monster Buck series and all those original titles, we always get a lot of comments about like Steve Stoltz in those videos. I just kind of remember hearing about misses or this or big deer. What was it about Steve that was so that people gravitated towards?
Well, number one, he was on some giant deer. Number two, he had a history where something would go wrong. The arrow would come off the string. The buck would catch him. He blamed a few things on the hole in his glove. He had some misses, and he, like all of us, get very excited when a deer comes in, and he was just getting really excited and not able to close the deal. I remember one time, I don't think we aired this, but he was at full draw. And there was a buck crossing a little ditch and he's trying to get him to stop, but he actually released the arrow and then went, Matt. So that tells you where your mind is if you're releasing and then going, Matt. So the arrow's in mid-flight. He goes, Matt, the deer takes off. And it was a terrible,
funny.
We should try and find it because it was hilarious. We watched that and laughed so hard and so long. That was the thing we would do then that we don't do now is review footage and watch it over and over and over again.
And let me tell you something. You didn't want to be reviewing footage with Mark and Terry back in those days because they were pretty critical of the footage. I mean, that's why we have the name we have, and the product was perfect, right? To the best that they could do. But there were a lot of tough conversations, and usually everybody was drinking a beer while they were being had.
Well, we grew up in a construction mentality, so thank goodness those weren't on film. Because, we were rough on each other, but that's the way we grew up. You know what I mean?
So would you write the script based off the footage you thought you had?
Well, we would go out there with a plan oftentimes ahead of the season and try and execute to that plan, and then it would fill in itself as it went on. So
and then the edit was a whole different story. I mean, back then, we're in nonlinear editing days now. So that means you can take a clip and move it anywhere you want to move it, and you can kind of play around. It's like a blank canvas. You can move your clips around wherever you need to move them. Well, back then it was not that way. It was linear. That means that you had to create an edit decision list, an EDL, and you literally watched the raw footage. You would create there was a time code thing that you would display that you would have on, and you'd be writing time codes down of when you wanted to cut from shot to shot. And you'd have to put in wanted a 30 frame dissolve, a 60 frame, or whatever it might be to get from this clip to the next clip. Well, by the time you went to the edit studio, you literally had your whole title created in one EDL written out, but you didn't know how it flowed or looked that had to have been the hardest part of those early days.
It was. Well, that's why they're so long. If you watch them, that's the way people edited, but you couldn't think fast enough the way these guys edit now, and Jim Howe was the first one that I remember saying, watch Survivor. He was editing for us at the time, and this would have been after this date, but he goes, watch them. They change the scene every 2 or 3 seconds, and I would never forget him saying that. And it was right, but we were leaving stuff up for 30 seconds, a minute and a half.
Yeah, the pace is much
very slow. I have trouble even going back and watching.
Well, then not only that, but you and Terry would write the voiceovers. So you'd have to write all the voiceovers. Now, did that come after you had the first cut?
Yeah, we would watch it and go back and write the VOs. Generally at night, we would edit all day, and then we would go in and write VOs so that we could do it again the next day because we didn't have a studio. We were renting a studio.
It was costly.
It was costly. So we were editing all day and all night more often than not. It was incredible how many nights we edited till midnight, 1, 2 o'clock. And
then you'd have to go and compose the music to the edit. So they were hiring composers at that time.
We were. Pete Skolka out of Columbia did all of our original soundtracks, and nobody else was doing that at the time.
Yeah.
Those were all original soundtracks.
and I look back to some of that stuff, and because we would watch it so much, because we used to have watch parties then. Like once it was done, the whole family would come. Like I'm talking the entire family.
And nobody talked. Everybody watched.
Shut up. And you're watching it on a small TV. It's just, but those are the fond memories from those early days. I could remember vividly at mom and dad's old house over there in Park or whatever, where grandma and Barb and all of them live, and everybody coming over, sitting in this little bitty, the living room wasn't much bigger than our set here. And you got all the siblings. So all of Mark and Terry's siblings, their spouses, and then all the kids, grandma and grandpa. And we would sit and watch those videos.
The movie stars.
Yeah.
Watch this 90-minute marathon of deer hunting.
And be fascinated by it. But the music tracks and those types of things, I remember that stuff very, very vividly as a young kid, because I would have been, I'm probably 8, 9, 10 through those years, roughly 9, 10, somewhere in there. So I remember a lot of that stuff, and watching them film the interviews at the 40 Acre Club, and like it was just interesting to be behind the scenes and to see it all take place.
It's a big production.
Yeah.
I grew up watching Marty Stauffer's Wild America, and the older DOD videos put me in mind of Marty Stauffer narrating.
Terry loved Marty Stauffer as well. That's probably why it put you in the mind. Terry thought he was the Marty Stauffer of deer hunters.
And Dad, for whatever reason, he loved to flex his vocabulary.
Yes.
In every voiceover he ever written.
He's digging deep for $5 words.
And And then Aunt Linda, who was a grade school teacher at the time, she would look for grammatical errors. I remember that. Yeah.
She would proof a back cover copy, that we were writing. And it was a painstaking process. It was the long form with everything. Everything took a long time, but we didn't know any better. I mean, look at us now. I mean, we spit stuff out of here like it's just, like that.
Sure.
These guys are incredible. So
I remember, I think it was probably maybe Whitetail Madness. Was that the one where you guys were starting to kind of a diary, so to speak? Not a diary, but kind of a journal.
Yeah, it was definitely chronological, and it was a journal approach. And
you guys have a clip where we're in Mom and Dad's current home now. It's a long time ago too, and he's in his den, and there's a camera moving. There's a camera moving.
We were in a rolling chair, and someone would film with the rolling chair, and another guy would wrap them around. But it looked like we had a jib or a slider there. I mean, it was a poor man's. But if you watch it, it's like that's pretty well shot.
It bumps as you roll over the carpet,
and then there'd be that 90 frame dissolve,
long, slow dissolve into the paper with what's being written on it. We actually had the paper designed and printed so that we had the right look we wanted. I mean, we were anal about everything. Wow. We wanted the right look and feel. So it's pretty cool though. That one I think took us a step forward in terms of our production. I think that was
Whitetail Madness 1
where we killed that 195 over in Illinois. So that was a big deal for us because it was the biggest deer on video ever. And we took our production up a notch, and that tape sold a lot of copies, And
I remember more behind the scenes stuff. You guys created because Terry has a construction company. So anytime you guys needed to build something, they built it, and so it was a gigantic white sheet,
for sunscreen.
Yeah. To kind of shield the sun from being too harsh, give them the right shadows or whatever.
We'd filter the light through that white screen. And that's why if you watch our interviews, they were always really pretty light,
Yeah. But it was gigantic.
It was a big one.
It was huge.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a big, massive thing. That was behind the house. I remember doing that. And Steve coming over, Steve Stoltz, my buddy Matt. No, full circle, Steve hunts with us again now. He killed a booner this year.
Stevie Wonder.
Yeah. So
you guys certainly put in the time and the effort.
We did. But that's why the tapes took off too, or the DVDs, whatever it was, they were always well received. And, back then, and this was the VHS world on the shelf, they were selling for $50 a piece. That deserves mention. Now everything's free and online, and our partners, by and large, facilitate the money side of things. But back then it went to the dealer for $50.
It was a rental. Basically, they would rent it. I don't know. What would a rental be? The cost of a consumer going to rent it?
$2 or $3, $5, whatever it was,
Because when we talking about trade shows and running into people, a lot of times when these people come up and say hi to Mark and Terry, it's like, man, I used to wear the rental shop out, renting, Monster Bucks 1 or Right Place, Right Time or whatever it was,
Be kind, please rewind.
Remember that, yeah.
rewind the tape. Don't let it at the end of it. But yeah, the good old days. I'm glad he asked this question. I'm having memories now.
Flashbacks.
Yeah, flashbacks. I think back to Jay and Don and all that they brought to the table, and Ronnie Smith and Herb Schultz. I mean, just incredible friendships that were formed back in the day, but incredible whitetail hunting experience. These guys were all good, and all the hunts were always in the woods. You almost were never on a field edge.
Yeah.
To me, it's encouraging to see some of the smaller bucks that you guys shot back then and were so excited about, bucks that I would probably still shoot to this day, and just how you put in your time and your hunting has evolved to where you're being more selective about deer. But if people saw the deer that you're shooting back in the early 90s, they look like deer that pretty much most bow hunters, most deer hunters would shoot. Yeah.
I think what gets lost a lot today is a little bit of the history, because in fairness to the consumer, if you're a young guy, how would you know what our history is, or how you just always knew, Mark and Terry are trying to harvest upper end deer or manage for upper end deer. So they see, the quote unquote deer farm, a popular term that gets thrown around, but it's not that way. It's just that you have evolved into that, and you've become more and more successful through the years because of the hardships in the early years. So you didn't just start out with 1,000-acre farm. It was hunting the 40-acre club and ridge running deer, and it's just you everything that you have now is through time and through things that you learned through that time. So it is neat. I'm glad he asked that, because you can go into DeerCast and watch every one of those video titles. Literally, we remastered, redigitized all of those old titles, and they're all inside the DoD TV section inside DeerCast.
So especially this time of year, if you're really missing deer season, if you don't already have a pro or an elite DeerCast account, get one, because that'll give you access to all those
full library
old school hunts.
Yeah. So,
it's a good time.
I forget how 119 titles or 120 titles.
Something like that.
Yeah. So
there's a lot. And if you're like me, like I go in and I audit, I can't sit down and watch a full show.
Well, his point's like 2 hours. So
you better have some time.
You really have to, and just kind of retrain your brain for the pacing of those titles.
Yeah.
But man, it's a lot of fun to see the old school hunts.
I'd love to hear Terry's thoughts of what he remembers, because he has a crappy memory, but these types of things he does tend to remember
this stuff. Yeah. He'd remember all that. He'd remember more than I'm recalling today. He does have a great memory for that type of stuff.
Yeah,
sure.
Well, and any parting shot, one last memory or hunt or anything that stood out before we.
One thing I always remember, like we used to split up the stands of who was going to go hang the set, trim the set. And then we had maps on how to get there. And by and large, we all knew where they were. Well, we were over in Pike County, and we're hunting over there, I believe at the time with Heartland Lodge at the time. And Stan was one of our guys. It was me, Terry, Stan, and Steve. And we would rotate who we were filming with. I'd be with Stan for a few days, then Steve for a few days, then Terry for a few days. And I'm with Stanley, and we, in the dark, climb up into the set that Stoltz had hung and then trimmed. We got out there and it got light, and Stan Potts was so mad. His face was red, and he was grabbing me. And if Stoltz would have been there, I believe he'd have killed him, because you couldn't have shot. You couldn't have weaved an arrow into the ground. There was no trimming. He hung it in a tree that was easy to hang in a spot where there was so much undercover. And Stan goes, triple canopy, and he just kept under his breath. He was so mad, and we finally climbed down, and he went marching down the truck, and he went looking for Stoltz, because Stoltz, he goes, this was my day to hunt, because he knows he has to then film, and Stoltz took that away from him. And boy, when he saw Stevie, he let him have it because of that triple canopy.
And it probably didn't bother Steve one bit.
No, didn't faze him. Not at all.
That's the stuff. I love listening to those stories, man. It's so entertaining to think back, but at the time, I'm sure you and Terry got a kick out of that.
Oh yeah. Well, we let most things roll off our back, but some things would irritate us. But Stanley was one you didn't want to take away from his day in the tree hunting.
I don't think I'd want to stand pots mad at me.
So back then, they're flipping back and forth. So everybody, it's a lot different now because a lot of our guys, few teams for Drury Outdoors do it where they flip back and forth anymore. Almost everybody is, got a buddy to film them or whatever. But back then you guys always did.
It was all the way.
Was it every other hunt, right?
Pretty much. Yeah. We'd do an evening and then the following morning. So you were hunting every day. And then we would switch the following evening and then the following morning. That way you hunted every day.
How long would you get guys be hunting? Meaning duration of like 3 weeks or 4 weeks or just
we would generally
weekends,
start right around Halloween and we'd be done by the 15th, 18th of November, somewhere in there we were done. Like we didn't hunt a lot. That's why all the hunts look the same. They were all in the timber in the rut because they were filmed at the exact same time every year. And then we started hunting a little bit more earlier in the season and later in the season.
In the early days, it's probably as much related to couldn't get off of work that much to
didn't have the time. Yeah. And even the time that I took, Cecil wasn't happy with how much time I was taking, but we did it.
I wonder about what time frame you guys started hunting more early and late season then. Was it early 2000s, late 90s?
Certainly by the late 90s and early 2000s, we learned a lot of that late season stuff together. And Don Kiske was the one that was really pushing that envelope with the size of his food plots kept expanding. And, the way we would go in there and hunt during the late season, we learned a lot from Don and from that standpoint. I remember the first time he told me, he said, don't even waste your time on anything less than 3 acres on a bean field. It needs to be 4 or 5 or bigger. And that still holds true to this day, in terms of having enough food so that it's still meant something during the late season. So we just learned a lot back in those days from Stan and Jay and Herb and Ron and Don.
A lot of best practices we take for granted, right? Because at some point, someone had to think of this.
These were the pioneers that were thinking of this stuff, and a lot of people don't even recognize that.
I wonder where was Don? I mean, was it stuff that he was coming up with on his own, or did he have a mentor, so to speak?
No, Jay and Don were both learning this stuff on their own. They didn't have mentors.
Yeah,
no, we were all learning it together, and I learned a lot about food plotting from Don. I learned about the importance of time in the stand from Jay and overall persistence. No one would hunt harder and longer in November than Jay Gregory did back then. Like we'd all be done back on the road and he's killing monsters November 20th, 25th, 28th. I mean, giant deer. And I learned that from Jay. He was the most persistent and driven hunter I knew back then. Learned a lot from Stan in terms of trimming sets and how much intrusion you could get by with. Stan was always the guy that he went into the bedroom, scouted it real hard. Wherever the sign was, he'd hang right in the middle of the sign.
Really?
Yeah. He was the most aggressive, intrusive hunter I've ever been around.
And he had
pretty successful
200-inch deer.
Oh yeah. He had two 200s under his belt at that point already.
When nobody was,
nobody did.
Yeah.
I mean, mega giants, so all those early lessons, a lot of it still sticks with us today.
Yeah.
Pretty amazing.
And it's all in DeerCast.
Well,
it is all in DeerCast.
That's the cool part. You think about where technology has come.
Our brains are in that app,
I remember early hunts, early days where the Weather Channel was on nonstop.
Oh yeah.
It was just always the only channel that was on the television in camp was Weather Channel.
Yes. All day, every day. We'd watch the same forecast over and over and over again. We felt like we knew Heather Tesh, because she was always on there. It's like they didn't have many people back in the day and she was always on there.
And now, people, you don't think about that, but it's at your fingertips hour by hour. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Whatever you need.
When I'm getting updates from the Weather Channel, it's about the rain in my area at 9:26.
Yeah. 3 minutes, the rain will end.
And then it'll tell you how much you just got, right? How much rain you got.
Pretty incredible.
It's awesome. Yeah. Technology's awesome. Makes us all better.
Speaking of
saves us time.
Why don't we do the wildlife word?
Okay, bring it down a notch.
Come on.
This week's wildlife word, defensive vomiting. Really makes you think, doesn't it?
That's a defensive vomiting, I would think would be if you want to party a few days in a row and you party too much the first night, you have to defensively vomit so you can go again night two. Be my
learn that in those early days.
Now that we're talking about the old days.
So it's close. The use of vomiting to defend against ingested pathogen, so some kind of illness that maybe it was in spoiled food or something that an animal ate, or against predators. Vultures are known for vomiting a nasty, foul-smelling substance that's so bad it scares predators away.
It scared me away.
Fun fact, I was on my road bike one day coming down a downhill section doing probably 40 plus miles an hour, and I see these black blobs in the road way up ahead of me, and I thought, that's a family of raccoons crossing the road. I get closer and they're not moving, and I'm getting concerned that I'm going to hit these things. I see that there are vultures eating on something in the road, so I start hollering at them, and they eventually at the last minute take off, and as one of them's taken off, it ejected, it defensively vomited as it's flying over me. So I take it on the right side of my helmet.
Oh no.
Down my abdomen, hits my leg.
I would have loved it.
And I'm still doing 40 plus miles an hour. So you don't take your hand off the bars to wipe it away. You just finish out the downhill section until you get to the bottom where you can start wiping away the vomit. Probably the worst set of circumstances that could happen in that.
And the coronavirus was born.
Patient zero. Here I am.
On that note,
why don't we shut this thing down?
Can't get much better than that. Not visual.
We have no giveaways right now. If you wanna send in a question like listener Jim did, go to DruryOutdoors.com/podcast and hit the send voicemail button and leave your name, location, and short, brief question, and we'll do our best to answer it.
Thank you, Jim. That was a good one.
Mm-hmm. It was. Yeah. Appreciate it.
All right.
Appreciate the trip down memory lane, Jim.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Till next time, be safe.
See
Peace
ya.
out. We're adding new videos every week, so make sure to click that subscribe button and check out all of our amazing content. This episode of DoD TV is brought to you by OnX Hunt, the nation's #1 GPS hunting app.